or you have to keep all this backup generation. You have to consider the cost. If you're just looking at peak pricing, you may not be capturing the whole picture.
And where that translates into you know, how distributed generation PPAs work with utilities is in the form of some kind of curtailment option on the part of the utility, and there's economic curtailment or curtailment just for system reliability. And these are the kinds of things that creep into utility PPAs that make the bank say, well, you know, if we don't know that it's going to run, we can't finance your project. So these are the kinds of things that affect financing. It's affected financing, you know, in Hawaii, it's affected financing even, you know, in kind of the SoCal Ed area in terms of the option in the utility to curtail a project. And the only thing that the banks can really analyze then is what is the historic rate of curtailment, and there isn't a lot in distributed generation solar in terms of history, but you know, the only option then is to look at the utility and say how often do they really curtail intermittent resources.
So one of the things I don't think we're really thinking about too much is the future, and if there are, which I think there's bound to be, a lot of advances in energy storage, even on small scale, as well as more efficiency out of the systems that are being produced. I mean, if we look 20 years down the line, you know, whereas my house right now might be able to do a 40% solar fraction on an annual basis, add a little bit of storage to that and add some technology advancement, and I might be pretty much able to unplug from the grid. And I think that's the thing that, I mean, it's almost the thing no one wants to bring up as far as the utilities go, because they just count that as being a future, but I think it's a reality that that is the future. It's not going to be the future for big, large manufacturing, but for your typical home, your typical use, it very well could be that you could be independent. And I think, you know, a smart utility would look at that as its inevitable future and start to try to change its model from a model where it's making money off of all these residential folks, and where they really look at their major power users and try to utilize distributed generation, try to utilize the fact that some people are in locations where that value of the power production at that location is worth more than at another place. And maybe that should be introduced to the market price. In other words, the utility would come to you and say, hey, I want to put this PV on your rooftop space, or a power purchase agreement kind of thing. I know there might be regulation issues for the utilities to do that, because they can't be owners, but can they be investors? And if not, it just seems like their job going forward then would be to make sure the system is maintained, operating properly. I mean, they've just changed their model to some extent.
There's no questions, you know, storage is really key. And there's a lot of major storage coming online in other countries, utility grade, you know, megawatt storage. So you can buffer that intermittency, and it's less of a strain on the utility. No question. And you could do it in your house too. You put batteries in your house, and if you could drop your electrical consumption by half, you could do it all.
That's the other thing that we're not taking into consideration is LED lighting
and just the energy efficiency that is coming into technologies now. I don't think we've seen the full effect of that. People are still all using incandescents, but the you know, switch over to LEDs, that alone is going to make a huge dip in power consumption.
You know, one thing everybody talks about, this risk thing in the morning. Now, I know nobody's building nuclear plants now. There are some people saying they're going to build them. But I mean, think about it from a financial point of view. Think of it as it's your money. So you want to build a $5 billion nuclear plant that you know in your heart of hearts is really going to be 12. It's going to be 10 years from now. It'll be ready to go. What happens if there's no demand then? You're screwed, and you're going to lose your job and your retirement too. Probably a couple reasons why they're not doing it. Same thing, there's a lot of risk here. A lot of risk.
I built passive solar houses. I've had it a long time, and in fact, 50 or so of my houses are efficient, call them a low energy requirement house, to the point where you really can't justify PV. I'm intending in 2014, if the market allows it, to offer as a standard offer a house off the grid, every house I do. So being on the grid will be an option. But this is an arena where nobody's even thinking about. I have storage. I have 100 tons of mass. I store 100,000 BTUs per degree Fahrenheit. Been doing that for 40 years. I currently have houses that are all electric with ground source heat pumps, heating, cooling, hot water, $700 a year in an 8,000 degree climate. Been doing that a long time. Why aren't we doing more of that?
It's a lot easier to store thermal energy than electrical energy, but if anyone in the audience is seriously considering a passive solar home, that's a gentleman to speak to. I think he's built like 400 of them.
376 or something.
I meant by the end of this year.
Just twofold question, probably more to Evan and Laura, on this issue of standardizing PPAs. The question would be, are increasing the percentage just saying that you're always using, or are you still continuing to negotiate one by one? And then the other would be maybe some stories about whether relationships with utilities have improved with your companies over time. First time you do an interconnection agreement on a larger scale project, first time for the utility tends to be slower than second, third, fourth times.
They're rather different scenarios. Maybe you want to take it from.
Yeah, we don't do residential projects. We do, our smallest projects are probably 250 kW. So we do have PPAs. We have a standard one that we always start with, and we always say we're not deviating, even a word from this. And in the end, we usually make a couple of accommodations. And for the size of projects that we do, 2, 3, 4 megawatt projects, it's not that time consuming to deviate a little bit and negotiate a PPA. In terms of the utilities, I think it's not particular to my company, but just as a reflection of the industry, as the utilities get more experience with some of these issues, net metering, interconnection, they're getting more experience. And we've seen that in every market that we've been in. Some markets are still struggling a little bit more than others. We have some markets where the relationship is that a utility decides to do a feed-in tariff, and then it's the local distribution company that's stuck trying to figure out how to implement all the demand they have now for solar, and that probably creates a little bit of tension between the LDC and the utility if they're not the same party.
And then, from the residential side, in each market, our customer agreements are largely the same. Obviously, the system size will change and so forth, but essentially it's the same offering. For us, the question of consistency really is more around things like permitting. From a residential perspective, when you're dealing with 351 towns in Massachusetts or however many in New York, and each one of those is unique and has a different process and different timeline, that's the kind of thing that we're concerned with.
And for us, it's also interconnection cost. It's really material in some of the newer markets. We would have comparable projects in one state that would have an interconnection cost or an interconnection upgrade of 10 times what the same size project would be for the same host customer in another jurisdiction. So interconnection costs for us can be deal breakers very easily.
And just one further point on interconnection, on the residential side, because of the volume, the response time is really the key issue for us, as opposed to any really significant concerns around infrastructure. It's a question of volume and utilities being able to do so on a timely basis and a consistent basis.
So I have a question about natural gas prices and their effect on electricity prices, what's happened recently, and I would just love sort of the point of view from the NYSO of what you're seeing with that, and then on the flip side, how that's changing PPA agreements and leasing agreements, given that we've hit this crazy scenario where price of electricity is actually going down.
Yeah, we see big changes. It's affecting the portfolio. Our coal plants are retiring. somebody else, maybe Peter was mentioned, the effect on coal. They're the ones seeing it the most. Prices are down, and which is a big benefit to the consumer, of course. The generation mix has been changing, so it's the coal plants are retiring. We're seeing more and more dependency on gas-fired generation. It's also affecting some other resources. We've seen a big drop-off in interconnection requests from wind generators. In part, we believe, because of the fall in gas prices. Although I think there's other factors there also with the wind generation. There was a lot of that got built upstate where there's not a lot of demand. And the transmission system is somewhat saturated. So you would need to build something closer to the downstate, which is what's potentially exciting about solar energy, is that you can build it a lot closer to load.